Hey, highlighters, Erin King here. And today I am so excited to introduce a gal who in her bio says that when life gives her lemons, she makes pretty good damn lemonade. Friends, Carla Romo. Carla, how are ya?
I am doing great. How are you?
Doing so good. And it's so nice to finally get to meet you. We
Finally.
originally crossed paths at first live gig, sort of after, air quote, the pandemic. You rocked the stage at a women's conference in PA. I heard amazing things about you. And I'm just so excited to talk to you live.
I know. This is very fun. And it's I've seen you live, but I didn't get to talk to you live. So finally we're able to connect.
I'm so excited. And your book, Contagious Love, loved it. First of all about breaking codependency, breaking some of the behaviors that really hold us back when it comes to relationships that we know we shouldn't have in our life, and yet we still lean hard into them. Why do we do it, Carla? Why? I mean, let's hear your backstory first, and then let's unpack some of this crap so that maybe I can release one bad codependency in my life, and hopefully my highlighters
Right.
can do the same. Someone's coming to mind.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
tell us your story. You were 24. You kind of hit rock bottom. Tell us more about your story.
Yeah. So I was 24 years old and I was in an abusive relationship. And I just saw two paths in front of me. And this isn't the first codependent, unhealthy, toxic relationship that I had been in. This was kind of starting to become a pattern. Like at a very young age, I needed the validation of feeling worthy through a man, or at the time a boy, like at a very young age. So I thought that I was worthy if I was in a relationship, because that meant that somebody loved me. So I was lovable then at that point. And so I found myself in this situation where I wasn't in a great relationship. I saw two paths in front of me. I had gone on this like solo trip to Ireland. I'm standing in the Wicklow forest, and all of a sudden I just see, okay, you can continue these behavior patterns over and over again, and it's just going to be self-sabotage, and this is just going to be the story of your life, and you're just going to keep doing it. Or you can end that relationship, and as I like to say, that day I begun the most important relationship, which is the relationship with myself. And so from there I thought, you know what, I am not the only one who has at this point put in the work around self-love. And I'm not just like hashtagging self-love in this. I am talking about really showing up for yourself. How are you talking to yourself? That is what I look at as self-love, right? Where it's coined a lot of times as like, oh, you get a facial, that's self-love, which, like, don't get me wrong, I love a good facial, but that's not the depths we're talking about here.
Okay.
And I realized too that it wasn't just my romantic relationships. I was working in television at the time in Los Angeles, and I had a very codependent relationship with work and what that looked like. And so I just kind of took this ball of yarn, untangled it, and broke free from codependency in my life. And so I thought, others are going through this shit too. Others are having a hard time, whether it's relationships or just work or whatever it might be. And they say up to 90% of us are codependent to some extent. And obviously, codependency is on a spectrum. Okay. So don't like freak out if you're like, oh my God. But I did the work, and I thought other people need this too. And so that's how I became a life coach around this stuff, wrote my book. I've got a podcast. I do talks. So yeah, that's how it all came full circle.
I love your story, because I love the stories where someone says, I was here, I saw myself, I stepped outside myself, and looking down just made a straight up badass, no holds bar, take no prisoners decision to make a hard left. I figured out how to make it work for me. So let me just share what's worked for me, and hopefully can help you do the same. Like, I love that. I love when it's not like this perfectionist guru that's like, I have all the answers, or someone that's a hot mess that's just like downloading their problems and like we should be getting paid to hear them. You have this beautiful blend of like, let me just tell you what has actually worked for me. And I love your approach. So let's rewind it back to Ireland. I'm an Irish citizen. Okay.
Amazing.
Oh yeah, girl. I lived in Ireland. I went to UCC. Cool. I was an Irish step dancer, the whole thing. So cool. I also find that to be a magical land. So you had my heart when you mentioned the Wicklow forest. But amazing. So for a lot of us, like even when you were talking about your Wicklow forest moment, I think a lot of us have had a Wicklow forest moment where it's so stark and so obvious, and the universe is literally beating us over the head with like a cast iron skillet full of Irish soda bread to like wake the fuck up. And let me just ask you this. Do you think that all of us need to have a Wicklow Forest moment before we'll actually make a change?
Yeah, I call it our bottom, right? Like everybody has to hit a bottom to make changes. And if you are a codependent, you're trying to control somebody else's life to some extent, fix them, whatever, and you're holding on and preventing them from hitting their bottom. So even, codependents, we have our own bottom of, oh, this ain't working anymore. These are unhealthy behaviors. Okay, but as a codependent, you're trying to help somebody else, and what you're doing is you're also stopping them from their bottom.
So how do we know? Okay, this is the part that I'm always confused about. How do we know the line between, because I'm very quick to be like, you're toxic, you're on my nerves, I'm drawing a boundary. And then my mother and my sister will be like, yeah, you're also being selfish, and you need to be more concerned that. So it's always that push and pull, right? Because the ones that we're drawing the boundaries around, they get pissed because they're not able to access us in a way that helps them. So it's like someone always kind of like loses. Is it always a sum zero game here? Or like, how do we know, how do you figure out what the line looks like for you in your life? Whether it's like, okay, I'm gonna like, I'm gonna suck it up. I'm gonna show up because that's what good people do. And I love this person. And then how do you know when it starts to veer into like the Wicklow Forest of like, hell the fuck no, we've gone too far?
Okay, so I always say boundaries, right? And boundaries are not for anybody else. Boundaries are not about winning or losing. They're not walls, they're not barriers, right? They're not there to protect yourself. They're not coping mechanisms. They're tools, right? It's a tool to take care of yourself. So they are bendable. You can, change your boundary. And I always say you don't change your boundary because you're letting somebody cross your boundary. You're changing your boundary because it's no longer serving you. So it comes from a place of what do you need? So you got to ask yourself, like, what do you need? So if you are talking, for example, to somebody who just feels very toxic and what you need is to not have communication with them, then that's okay, right? Like, but I also would say if it's coming from a place of hate, like, oh, I'm never talking to this person again, they're horrible, this is my boundary, I would say, okay, hold on. Your motive for the boundary might not be very clear. You might still have the same outcome of not talking to that person, but the motive is maybe to punish them. You're in fear. You're scared of getting hurt. So you're just cutting this person off versus a very grounded place of, you know what? I feel upset. This person's making me angry. Realistically, I don't think this is good for me to continue being friends with them or continue having some kind of relationship with them. So I always say it starts with you of like, okay, what do you need? And that's hard. A lot of people don't think about themselves that way of like what your needs are. But I also think as well, this like Wicklow Forest moment, right? Where you have these two paths in front of you. I think at the end of the day, when you're really looking at something like that, that's like your moment of like universe is like in your face. So I look at that as a different moment than just boundaries and how you live your life day to day.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good distinction. And I think that kind of being a little more intentional around the circumstances of the emotion. Like I love that you just called out, is it fear? Is it operating from a place of fear or not? And that's a huge question. It's tricky to answer. And oftentimes I feel like I don't want to hear the answers a lot of times when we search ourselves for like what's really going on here. We're like, ooh, because it always takes two to tango, right? So what would you say is, so I've only broken up with two girlfriends in my entire life, and both of them were highly toxic. I mean, literally one of them was 7 years ago, another one was 10 years ago. And Carla, like when I say that I am still emotionally scarred from those girl breakups, and I can literally go through 7 dudes that I can't even remember their last name pretty much. Like, I don't know why breaking up with girlfriends for me has always been so much more traumatic than breaking up with guys. Now, whether someone listening has a toxic girlfriend or in the bad relationship romantically, how do we begin to, like, is it that fear of the ongoing sadness, like mourning the relationship that keeps us from doing it? Like, why is it so hard when we know better? Like, when we know better, why can't we do better?
So I think first and foremost, like when you have a relationship with somebody, even if it's toxic, right? Like even if your girlfriends were like horrible toward you, there is something that's great about them. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been friends with them. And so maybe you hold on to, or people hold on to fantasy of what they could be or what the potential is. They fall in love with what could be, with the situation where it could go. If this person only maybe changed this or got help or things went back to how it was in the beginning, it would be fine, versus the reality, right? You have to fall in love with reality. You have to fall in love with the facts and look at it as information and detach yourself. And when I say detach, I don't mean like cut yourself off or build a wall or boundary. But I mean, detach yourself from, the emotional side. So it doesn't mean you can't mourn your friend. It doesn't mean you can't feel your feelings. I think that is important. But when you're trying to like get your logic and your heart to meet, sometimes you have to kind of play a little bit with the logic, the information side, reality, in order for your heart to kind of catch up.
That's so good. Why are they never on the same page? Like, can we just get some alignment? Like, you guys sort it out and then report back when you're on the same page. Thanks. Right? Like,
totally. Yes.
Every time, man. Oh, it's so true. So, I mean, right now at time of recording, it's February 2022. And I don't know about you, Carla, in terms of your clients and your girlfriends and just your circle, but in my circle, the reinvention waves are strong. It is like a tsunami everywhere I look. Everyone I talk to is like, okay, not that we're out of the pandemic, because I had COVID 10 days ago. I'm still recovering from it. Like, it's still happening, PS. It's very real. I was coughing up a storm on my last podcast. But like, it's still real. But we are coming out the other side of it, into this new world, into this new place. And we are deciding who we want to be in this new season. And I think that what's interesting is like, when you look at the different types of relationships that we have now, we are deciding whether or not to reignite old relationships that maybe we now have had space from and have recognized that our life sadly was, maybe lighter without, or better without in a way, or felt more in line with who we are and our purpose and our goals and our values. We also have like the work side of things, right? Where people are used to having access to us 24/7 because everyone was home, nothing else to do. So let's talk about the work component of this. Like, how do we start to evaluate drawing these boundaries in this new season of like, what does life look like now? Especially with a lot of like flex work from home people and hybrid. Like, what are you seeing that's working for people?
Well, what I see is working for people during this time, which it is freaking crazy. Let's just like put it out there. Yeah. This is not normal. The whole like quote unquote our new normal. No bullshit. Like this is not normal. Totally. But I would definitely say like right now, what is working is that people are going inward and you're forced to go inward. Because if you think about what is happening, it's a trauma as a collective. So on an individual level, you might feel like, oh, I don't feel like this is trauma. But on a global collective level, it is a traumatic event that is occurring. And so when that is happening, and we're still going through it. So I've heard like other psychologists talk about how, usually during a trauma, there's an end and then, the trauma's done and then you're living and trying to cope and whatever, but we're still experiencing it. So what is working for people is taking care of yourself. I know it's not hot, it's not sexy, it's not cool, but the important thing here is like, are you following up with doctor's appointments? I mean, you're talking about things that are not fun to think about, but realistically, so many people are so sick right now because they have pushed off mammograms, right? Like women have pushed off mammograms. They're pushing off doctor's appointments, and this is all catching up to them. And so it's like, if you can start to take care of yourself, start to get ahead of the problem so you don't have to be reactive to a problem, and that can look like at work, right? Even just in regards to certain hours of checking your email. Maybe you were so used to being at home and just always on, but that's not sustainable and that's not normal. Most people are not supposed to be working out of their living room or their bedroom, even if you're on a hybrid schedule or whatever it might be. So it's really just taking a step back, asking yourself, what do I need to stay sane? How do you still socialize with people, right? Obviously, being safe about it. But at some point, isolating is just not healthy anymore. Right. So it's talking about like what your comfort level is, how safe you feel, all of those things. I honestly think right now that's like working for people. I also think as well, like I had a client and last night we were chatting and she's going to quit her job in July, go to Hawaii for a month and relax. And I think that is freaking awesome. And that's taking care of yourself because it's been crazy. She's an executive. It has been crazy. And during this time, and she can't take it anymore. And so she says she's being present right now. That's taking care of yourself. So she's not sitting here future tripping in a fantasy and not doing the next 6 months out, but she has a plan for herself. So even if it's the Great Resignation for you, or I've got other clients who are starting their own business who've been like, you know what, I really don't need to sit here and collect a paycheck where I could be laid off at any point in this job. Like maybe I want to start that business that I've always been wanting to do. So I think that also falls under taking care of yourself, taking steps to actually move forward so that you can be happy in your life.
Mm. Well, first of all, I love this idea about Hawaii. I'm totally into it. Here's the thing. Why don't we do the Hawaii trip? Like I always feel like when we talk about taking that space and that grace and that rest and that pause, it's weird because I feel like we should have had this pause. Like the universe was literally telling mankind to take a TO, take a time out. And I don't know about you, but for me, when my speaking business collapsed in the pandemic, like many people's businesses did, I grabbed a gear that I have never grabbed in my life. Like redid the website, launched an online course, wrote a new book, like blah, blah, blah. Like when you name my to-do list was ambitious and I double checked it all, right? And yet, so now it's like we survived it, air quotes, still surviving it. Like you said, the trauma is still occurring. But when we look at it, it's like we survived it, it's still occurring. And now a lot of us are feeling like we're out of gas and we're tired because we've been just trying to survive. And people are like, now it's time to thrive because things are back. And a lot of us really do need a minute. Like we need a minute to fill up our cups. And I always wonder, like, is it really that everyone, your boss, your coworkers, your girlfriends are judging you for taking the downtime? Or is it just us judging ourselves? Like, who's the critic here, you know?
Yeah, it's us judging ourselves 100%. Because one of my favorite lines, I did not coin this, but it's a great one for people who are codependent, is it's none of my business what people think about me. So, in terms of that, right, it's really not your business what other people are thinking about your life. I think the other thing as well is that, like, for you, yeah, that's freaking amazing. Like, you did all these amazing things you set out to do. You used this time, like, really went after it, right? Like, you are a doer, a go getter. Like, that is like your personality. I can just tell, like, you talking about that, right? But not for everybody, right? Not everybody is sitting here going, well, oh, like I didn't do all those things. And now, like, there's something wrong with me, or like I didn't do enough, or Taylor Swift, I love Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift came out with 2 albums like during, lockdown quarantine. Like what that, like this is crazy.
Freaking
Like
Taylor.
all this, yeah, Taylor.
Good
All these,
albums.
I know, like freaking
Good
amazing.
albums. Not even just like passing the time. Like
I know. She's just like, anyways, I could go on about her forever, but
same.
But if you really like take a step back and look at it here of like not everybody's life matched up to the pandemic and when they were ready to make that move, right? Like,
yeah.
And to think that your timing was off or there's something wrong with you because of that. Like maybe you haven't had your Wicklow Forest moment and that's still going to be in the future. You needed to go through this time period to get to that moment. Or maybe you did have it. And by the time the pandemic hit, you felt really good about where everything was and didn't need to really take the action. So I think a lot of it is internal. And I think as women too, like we judge ourselves sometimes a lot around, okay, if I'm successful in my career, my business, whatever it might be, then I am successful, right? And so it's like you have to do it all. Like you got to be the great partner, you have to be the great sister, great at your career, your job, your business, whatever it might be. And it's just so much pressure, but you can't do it all, right? Like that's not what balance is about. And so I just think that we are our own worst critics when it comes to things like this. And so I think if you just kind of take a step back a little bit and ask yourself, what is it that I actually want? Do I really want to accomplish all these things? Or am I doing it because I'm trying to seek validation? I'm trying to seek out being worthy, being noticed, feeling seen.
Totally. I mean, so well said, Carla. And I mean, I will say, just to like tell you the ending of that story, I mean, I accomplished everything on my list for 2021, like check, 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 check.
Awesome.
And at the end of the year, I did not feel successful. I did not feel what I thought I was going to feel. And that to me was so jarring because it was like my Wicklow Forest moment was not as glamorous. It was just like an emptiness. It was a sadness. It was like but I put off all the fun and I put off this and I put off that and I did all this for this like reward, but it didn't feel like I had a year of just all kinds of traumas. Like my dad got diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. My mom had melanoma. My puppy died in front of me. Ate my whole puppy. Like my husband lost millions of dollars in stock market. Like we just like had a year, and everyone has their version of like those dots. Like everyone listening right now is like, same. Their dots are just different, but everyone has them. And what I realized in that experience of that year of like checking off all the success milestones and not feeling successful, not having that joy, was that it was okay if for this year, for 2022, instead of my list being like a to-do list, I made a to-feel list.
Oh, I love that reframe.
where it was like, how do I actually want to feel from all doing all this shit? How do I want to
Yeah.
feel from hustling and going and da, da, da. And I will tell you what, I mean, knock on wood, fingers crossed. We are like 5 or 6 weeks into this year. So far, so good. I mean, literally
Amazing.
like putting out how you want to feel about it versus what we're trying to do. And I think it was almost like a self boundary. You know what I mean? Like drawing my own boundaries myself of like, let's like get our shit together, like check yourself before you wreck yourself. So, and I feel like your book, just to go back to, you know, Contagious Love, you have so many great recommendations of ways to do that. Like, I think probably chapter 7, like find your damn voice, and chapter 9, make it happen, girl. It's time. I mean, you have so many great strategies here in the book. And I think that the one that we really need now more than ever in this time of, you know, virtual vitriol and everyone just so much hate on the internet and so much negativity. And it's almost like popular to be a hater. It's popular to shit on everything.
Like cancel culture.
Right, same. And like you have this chapter 11 about positivity. And I know not to be like toxic positivity and everything's fine, but like, can we normalize being really positive as an okay thing?
Yes.
Like,
yes, absolutely. And I like that you distinguish the toxic positivity, right? Like, oh, it sucks. Like this just like horrible thing happened. And anybody who's listening is like, I don't know what toxic positivity is. That's kind of like me telling you like when you said like, oh, like all these horrible things that happened, you know, in 2021 to me. And I looked at you, I was like, well, at least you didn't have this happen, right? Like that's the toxic positivity. But yes, we need positivity. And the more that you can actually be positive, you are literally, okay, there's research. I'm not BSing you. Like you can rewire your brain to actually think more positive. And I'm like, when you talk about like the online like hate and the trolls, and I'm so against cancel culture, talk about a toxic environment, right? Like we are human. And if you cancel people, right, quote unquote, whatever, you are just feeding this negative pool, and you are like literally trying to like erase a human. It's awful no matter how much somebody effed up, you know?
Yep. I can't agree with you more. I'm like retweeting that as hard as possible. And I just think it's interesting. I mean, I think when you talk about drawing boundaries and you talk about, you know, life by design and being intentional about your inputs, whether it's your inputs from relationships, your inputs from news feeds, your inputs from outlets, like we absolutely need to Marie Kondo our news feeds and our, you know, relationships
Totally.
and our contact list, like absolutely. And I mean, like you said, I mean, we are human. And so I think that's like always an interesting line with like, I guess, how do you know, this is a tough question, but like, how do you know, like you're giving someone grace, you're giving them a second chance, like, you know, at what point, like, is there a certain like indicator? I know in your book you have red flags. Is there something that is a universal question that we can ask ourselves to help us get clear of how far are we willing to take this? You know, I know you mentioned earlier a little bit around some of the emotions, but like, how else can we, like right now, if someone's listening and they have a relationship in their life and they're like, okay, we're going round 5, but they really mean it this time, or they're doing the work, or space and grace. And, you know, at what point, like, does it always have to be that it's so obvious? Or like, what are some of the sneakier ways that people sort of violate those boundaries?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost is like you want to make sure that you're getting something from whatever it is. So you have to ask yourself, what am I getting from it? And that will be a very clear, you know, clear response. Your response will be clear in regards to how to move forward. And I think as well that like you have to be in reality. People hold on so much to like what could be and what would be. And that's just escaping your feelings in the moment. That's escaping the movements that you need, the action that you have to take in order to get to the next step. So if you mentally are just living in that next step and you're not sitting in today and you're not sitting in right now and you're not showing up and making decisions for yourself, then you're actually screwing yourself over for the future. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're worried it's not going to work out, or you're worried that this person's going to keep acting this way, or it's, you know, whatever it might be, right? In your relationship, or even honestly like work stuff and all of that kind of stuff. If you're not in today, if you are not in right now, then you are going to probably create some kind of chaos because you are reacting and responding to what could be in the future and something that hasn't yet existed.
It's so true. Like when you hear someone say like, I knew that was going to happen. And you're sitting here like, you're like, well, you sure did, you know, like, and
Yep.
I fight with my husband and my dad so much because both of them are such practical, realist, pragmatic.
Yeah.
You know, they're like you can't just live in a world of like rainbows and sunshine. Like you have to be real. You have to look out for stuff. And I'm always like, you guys, I mean, my husband is obsessed with not getting things stolen, and he's had his bike stolen 5 times. I'm like, you are driving this. Do you understand? Like, you are the one attracting this. He's like, oh, I stole it. I'm like, literally, like, he's like, so nothing should be locked. I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying, stop thinking about it so much because what you're like vibing, you're attracting.
Right.
You know?
I agree. 100% agree. It's like the people that are like, oh, like I really want my next relationship to work out, but they hadn't done the work or footwork of why they're attracting negative partners. So it's like, instead you go into another relationship trying to fix the last relationship or trying to fix some childhood wound with this person that is just never going to work. And so it's like you kind of create that self-fulfilling prophecy, that cycle, right? Like you said earlier, it takes 2 to tango, and like that might be your tango, is that that's what you're bringing to this.
Totally. I love how you said that. And it's interesting because if you do ask one of your friends, your coaches, or, you know, or your clients, customers, and you say to them, well, like, you know, what are you looking for in a relationship, whether it's a girlfriend or romantic, whatever. I don't know about you, but every time I ask a friend this, they immediately are like, well, I don't want da 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 da. I mean, their list of do not wants is miles long. And then you're like, right. So what do you want? And then there's like this silence. And it's so much easier for us to call out. And yes, it's great to know what we don't want. It gets us closer to what we do, especially in business. And business mistakes are the only way that we even figure out how to run businesses. I mean, I get it.
Absolutely.
At the same token, like, how can we be more intentional about making sure that we are spending more time? Like, even at the end of last year, for example, I kind of touched on a couple of like, it was almost like 10 years of trauma, just like packed itself into like 6 months of my life. Right. And at the end of the year, it was funny because it was New Year's Eve. And my husband and I always do this tradition where we, on New Year's Day, the next morning, we have champagne and we write down, you know, all the things we want to like leave in the year, like just like leave it back there, and we burn it in a pot and write a list of all the things that were fabulous about the year that we want to like carry into the new year. And it was crazy because even with the shittiest year on the planet, our list of good things was still longer than the bad stuff. And just going through that and being like, okay, wow, I thought last year was the worst year ever, but don't forget about, like, look at all this stuff that was getting overshadowed. But then once we kind of surfaced it and amplified it in our minds and put a microphone and a spotlight around it with this list activity, we burnt the old stuff, but we kept the good stuff. And now, so far this year, we've started to attract more of that abundance and joy by just calling it out. I mean, I know everyone's like, make a list, but don't you feel like it's just the easiest way to just get started is just to call it out? Like, what do you want? What are you looking for? What did go right? And
yes,
I just feel like we don't do that enough. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, I do something that I have clients do as well, but this is my own practice, which is I do a daily gratitude of 10 things I'm grateful for. And these are simple. I'm grateful that I had my breakfast this morning. I had a bagel. It was great. You know, I'm grateful that I got to be on this podcast and we got to, you know, connect finally, right? Like just little things that I'm grateful for that don't have to be like this big thing. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh shit, I've actually got a lot going for me right now. I'm grateful I have a place to live. Like I don't have to think about that today. Like just things that I'm grateful for in this moment can help put me already in that mindset. And I think as well too, people who list the things that they don't like, I actually would challenge you because once again, you might have the same outcome. You might not want somebody who is really bossy and loud. Okay, fine, whatever. Maybe that's business partner, romantic partner, friendship, like whatever, it doesn't matter. But it's what are the motives? Why is that your motive that you don't want that? And is it coming from fear-based thinking? Oh, I'm fearful of being in another relationship with somebody who's like that because I'm afraid of getting hurt again. If that's the issue, then you need to take a step back and you really need to ask yourself, like, the bigger question of what is it I'm afraid of? Maybe I haven't done some internal work and that might still be the outcome, but what's driving it is no longer fear-based.
I love that challenge. Highlighters, I think we should all take a minute and just put a pin in that one for Carla Romo, because next time we have that reaction, asking ourselves, like, what is at the heart of this? And I mean, honestly, so much of this work is just that intentionality of taking a minute and having the balls to hear the real answer and not shy away from it, because it can be scary to hear the truth. But I just think that, anyone who is hearing what Carla is saying and who is like, oh my God, I need to do that. She has an incredible framework. Her book, Contagious Love, Break Free from Codependency for Damn Good. It is like just a kick in the ass wrapped with like a fist bump of love. It is so good. And I just recommend everyone check it out. Carla, you are a joy. I love your energy. I'm so happy we connected.
Yes.
The gals listening are going to want more of you. So that's for sure. Where can they find you?
Yeah, they can find me at my website, Carla Romo, Carla with a C, Romo like Tony Romo. I don't know if you like football. I don't, but it's the question I always get asked. Are you related to Tony Romo? Sort of, no, not really. I don't know. And then you can find me on Instagram at I am Carla Romo, TikTok, I am Carla Romo. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, DM me, email me, whatever.
Thanks so much, Carla. You rock, and I so appreciate you.
Thanks.